Kris Jenner is the matriarch of the Kardashian-Jenner clan, a clan that is worth $6.6 billion. She manages and has cultivated what many say is America's royal family. Their products range from TV shows, to cosmetic lines, to apparel, to skincare, apps, health and wellness sites, churches, and shady business schools. She's created a billion-dollar brand with no desire to slow down. So how'd she do it? How did Kris Jenner come into so much power, wealth, and fame? Well, in order to understand Kris Jenner, you have to go way back. Kris Jenner's maternal grandmother, Lou Ethel Campbell, was born on October 20th, 1913 in Hope, Arkansas. As was typical for the times, Lou married young. She gave birth to one daughter, Mary Jo, on July 26, 1934. When Lou's husband cheated on her with another woman, she did the unthinkable for a small-town girl in Arkansas. She picked up and moved, without any help or support, to Southern California. Once there, she found work as an accountant on a naval base in San Diego. Kris Jenner wrote, quote, "My grandmother was very strong-willed and stubborn. She decided she didn't need a man. She was so confident, so smart, and she had a strong sense of self. Eventually, Lou met a quiet young man named Jim Fairbanks. Jim found himself smitten with the confident, spunky girl from Arkansas, and soon the two were married. They bought a house and settled into La Mesa, a small city outside San Diego. Jim worked at San Diego Glass and Paint and would give his wife Lou his paycheck to manage the family's finances. Though they lived a modest life, Lou made it a point to keep a good home, dress nice, and to always look presentable. Kris wrote, quote, "She always wore beautiful slacks with a matching blazer and the perfect blouse and shoes. Fashion and grooming were very important to her. Even if we were going to Disneyland, she made sure to take us shopping a few days beforehand to buy us new outfits for the outing."
You know, when I was a child, my grandmother taught me how to clean a sink. And, if you used a sink, like you brushed your teeth or you were doing anything in the sink, washing dishes in the kitchen, you had to clean the sink like I was in a hospital, basically. It was hospital style. Everything we did was so intense.
In the 1940s, Lou Ethel knew that if her daughter, Mary Jo, wanted to catch Mr. Right, she would have to cultivate a certain class to evoke images of glamorous movie stars like Grace Kelly and Audrey Hepburn. Lou wanted a better life for her daughter, and so she enrolled her in Fashionality, a charm school in a nearby community. In this school, Mary Jo learned about fashion, travel, beauty, grooming, and etiquette, and at the center of all of this knowledge was good posture.
My mom and my grandmother were very much alike because they were workaholics. They loved fashion. So they kind of, taught me, and then I taught my kids, I guess, that, it's the way you present yourself to the world. It was very important to my mom, to get up in the morning and, put on her, Sunday best. And my grandmother would say, "I can't go anywhere until I put my face on."
She was a fashionista.
So,
Your mom.
And to this day, if I see my mom and she's not dressed to the nines, it would be like, "Are you okay?"
In Kris Jenner's Unofficial Autobiography, the authors write, quote, "Mary Jo was only 15 at the time, and it seemed she had a bright and promising career ahead of her as a fashion model or actress. Upon graduation from high school, before she was able to chase her dreams in Los Angeles, New York City, London, Paris, or Milan, Mary Jo fell in love with a young man 4 years her senior, Robert Tuvey. Robert Tuvey was a regular guy who appreciated Mary Jo as the finest thing in life. They wed in San Diego on September 21st, 1952. Unfortunately, their union was brief, and they divorced 2 months later.
How old were you when you got kissed the first time?
15.
And who did you kiss? Do you remember his name?
Yeah, I married him.
Oh, amazing. Her first kiss she married.
So cute.
But we were only married 2 months.
2 months?
Yeah. Less than Kimmy.
Soon after Mary Jo's divorce was finalized, she met another young man who had all the qualities she and her mother were looking for. He was refined, successful, and very different from her ex-husband, who she considered to be a normal average guy. His name was also Robert True Houghton, who they called Bob. Bob was an aircraft engineer at Convair, an airline manufacturing company in San Diego. The authors write, quote, "Bob was charming and intelligent, and he earned an excellent income. He was tall, dark-eyed, handsome, and clean-cut. Bob swept Mary Jo off her feet and vowed to give her a life of luxury. He promised to support and provide her a life where she didn't have to worry or be concerned about money. the couple wed in 1954 and later welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Kristen Mary Houghton, on November 5, 1955. 3 years later, the couple welcomed their second daughter, who they named Karen. The family of 4 lived in Point Loma, an upscale, quaint neighborhood in San Diego. Growing up, Kris described her childhood as perfect, with the family living in a beautiful white house that they call the White Palace. Karen said, quote, "My mom was drop-dead gorgeous, and my dad looked just like Elvis. They had class, and they always dressed to kill." Kris added, quote, "My mom is and always has been so beautiful. She's tall, and she has such a beautiful figure. When I was a little girl, my mom dressed like all the women did in the 50s, with the fashion and the drama. Every day, she dressed like Jackie Kennedy. She always looked like she had on some fabulous Chanel ensemble, and her hair was perfect. She was so beautiful, and I adored and admired her." Though they lived a dream life, there was a lot of tension in the house, and soon the family went from being picturesque to toxic. Kris wrote, quote, "When I was 7, our parents had an argument, and soon they were arguing all the time. He was going away, our parents told us, but he would be back." From the outside looking in, Mary Jo and Bob were an ideal couple. Behind closed doors, though, Bob struggled with alcoholism and suffered from terrible outbursts. Frustrated with her husband's growing issues, Mary Jo decided that he needed to leave, and in 1962, she filed for divorce.
My parents got divorced when I was about 7, and that was a little traumatic because you don't understand it at such a young age, but
Life as Kris knew it was no more, and the perfect childhood she had abruptly ended. Initially, Robert made it a point to see his girls, but after being transferred to Long Beach, that would change. Kris wrote, quote, "The divorce was tough for me and had lasting effects. It was very, very hard for me to wrap my head around my parents not living together anymore. He would come to visit us and then leave again. That was really weird for me. I wondered, why is he leaving? Is he going to stay? Is this going to work out? When you are a child and your parents separate, you're always hoping that they're going to get back together." Unfortunately, though, they didn't. As Kris struggled with the abandonment of her father, her mother, Mary Jo, packed up their things and decided to move to Claremont, closer to her parents. They were now leaving their family home, leaving all the memories they had as a family of 4, and heading off to a new place to start over. As a single mother of 2, Mary Jo wouldn't show her girls that she was suffering from the demise of her marriage. She never broke down or gave them any indication that she was struggling. Instead, she put on a strong and upbeat presence and moved on with her life. Kris never fully eradicated the insecurities she faced as a result of her parents' divorce, which greatly influenced her need for attention, control, and financial security. On top of dealing with her new life and parents' divorce, Kris would face a shocking health crisis. One day, after walking home from school, she bumped her shin into a neighbor's retaining wall and needed an X-ray. Upon the X-ray, doctors discovered a tumor in her left knee that required surgery. They informed her parents that she would possibly need an amputation. This news was shocking, devastating, and completely tragic to the family for various reasons. Aside from the fear of Kris potentially having cancer and the fear of having surgery, Mary Jo was far more devastated about her daughter potentially losing her leg. In Kris's unofficial autobiography, the authors write, quote, "Privately, Mary Jo contemplated how Kris would deal with the catastrophic consequences of having only one leg. Up until that point, Mary Jo had taken comfort in how Kris's exquisite beauty would take her anywhere she wanted to go in life. Being a pretty woman certainly had its rewards and made life a whole lot easier in a male-dominated world."
I want to get back to
Annabelle?
Annabelle.
Okay.
So when you were young, you had a bone tumor, and my understanding is there was a chance you were going to lose a leg.
That's what they told my mom. The technology in those days was they couldn't tell if it was cancerous or not until they got in there. And if it was, they were going to have to amputate.
Once surgery was finished, doctors informed them that they were able to preserve her leg. This news was fantastic, and the family spent what would be one of the last moments together doting on her. Mary Jo had 2 kids to support and needed to work in order to financially support them and put food on the table. Kris wrote, quote, "From the moment my parents divorced, my mom worked full-time. She loved to work, and we learned from her that work was a positive thing." Regardless of the challenges Mary Jo would encounter, she was determined to live her best life, not just for her girls, but for herself. Financial stability and independence was really important to her, but so was something else. She found it equally important to surround herself in a male-dominant environment. She took jobs that put her in a position where she would meet wealthy men who could provide a better life for her and her girls. The authors write, quote, "Mary Jo had chosen the perfect place to work. La Costa was a gorgeous environment and the clientele was stimulating, especially since it was full of eye candy with handsome and wealthy men. Working at the resort put Mary Jo right in the face of many prominent men, and soon she would meet Harry Shannon. They wrote, quote, Harry was a high roller, always carrying a wad of $100 bills, which were tucked away in a money clip in his pocket. He was dapper and debonair with wavy sandy hair. Harry was charming and dressed with elegant sophistication. Kris wrote, quote, a few years after my parents had divorced, my mother met Harry Shannon. Harry was a great guy, and he quickly became her guy. They fell completely in love. Prior to meeting Mary Jo, Harry was married twice and had a thing for dating independent, successful women. Both of his exes were heirs to magnificent fortunes. He was a colorful person with a lively past, but his issues with booze would cause the demise of both marriages. They write, quote, Harry would come blazing up the valet. He was often sloshed out of his mind and would get belligerent and mouth off. Initially, Mary Jo played hard to get, but eventually she gave in to the charmer and things seemed to be going great until they weren't. Mary Jo inherited a spirit of discernment and soon suspected that, like her ex-husband, Harry had a problem with alcohol. They write, quote, Harry's behavior when he was drunk was the polar opposite of her ex-husband Bob's. Whereas Bob was angry, verbally abusive, and resentful, Harry was a happy drunk, the sloppy but affectionate kind. Harry's problems with alcohol would create a huge wedge in his relationship. Kris wrote, quote, it was the era of the Rat Pack, and everybody went to cocktail parties on the weekends. But Harry took it to the extreme. He was an alcoholic. Still, my mom loved him, dating him on and off. Harry would get so drunk and show up at their house banging on the door to be let in. Kris would grab Karen and crawl in their mother's bed hiding beneath the sheets until he left. Mary Jo would refuse him entry and told him that he couldn't come in until he sobered up. These episodes really scared the girls and gave them front row seats to a toxic relationship and addiction. Although Harry was a drunk, he was rich and exposed the girls to a life of luxury. Kris wrote, quote, Harry had money. He was a yacht broker and taught his clients to sail. He was an excellent sailor, and he was definitely a businessman. He walked around in fabulous white linen slacks, jackets, and fabulous loafers. He was the coolest, most beautiful dresser. Harry loved Mary Jo and didn't want his issues with alcohol to get in the way of their relationship, but his addiction terrified her daughters, and after another night of being intoxicated and belligerent, Mary Jo promised her girls that she would not subject them to that behavior again. A day or two later, Harry came crawling back on his hands and knees begging Mary Jo to take him back, and she did. Kris wrote, quote, he was apologizing profusely. A short time after that, he proposed. My mother finally gave him an ultimatum. Quit drinking and we'll get married. The very next day, he quit. Just like Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, Harry and Mom flew to Puerto Vallarta and got married, taking a few friends along for the ride. It was June of 1968, and I was 13. My sister and I were staying with my grandparents when Mom and Harry returned thinking, wow, we have a stepdad. From that day forward, I called Harry Dad. He embraced my sister and me as if we were his own. Harry taught me a big lesson in life. If you want something bad enough and are willing to change your life for it, you can do anything.
My mom was a working mom, which I think really added to a lot of the way that I am now, because you learn so much from your parents, and my mom was always working. She was a single mom for a long time, and then she got married to my stepdad, who was the love of her life and somebody that we fell in love with immediately.
After Harry decided to invest in a new business venture, the new family of 4 moved to Oxnard, California. They moved into a small, tiny apartment, which was a huge difference from what Kris was accustomed to. She had no friends and no interest in his new business venture, which was abalones. It's safe to say she hated Oxnard. 13-year-old Kris felt stuck in a town that she couldn't relate to. Though miserable, she learned a valuable lesson that she applied in the years to come. She wrote, quote, it made me think that I never wanted to be stuck again. I couldn't wait to be able to make decisions for myself after that. I never forgot the things I learned in Oxnard. Most important, that I never again wanted to be in the position of being completely powerless to do something about a situation I didn't want to be in. Just 3 months after the family relocated, something very unexpected happened. She wrote, quote, Harry's partner took all the money in the company, $15,000, and skipped town, never to be heard from again. My parents kept it quiet. We were young and they didn't want us to worry. I was happy when I found out. Not for the loss, but I was so excited to be going home. The family of 4 packed their things up and returned home to San Diego. Harry and Mary Jo were essentially starting over. Harry was entrepreneurial, and after working for his brother at a car dealership, began investing in various businesses and companies until he slowly yet surely was on his feet again. She wrote, quote, "Harry taught me that if someone says no, you're talking to the wrong person." Life in San Diego for Kris was stable, happy, and content. When the family moved to Oxnard, it was unstable and made her feel very uncomfortable. She made a silent promise to herself that if she could help it, she would never be in that position again, in a position of uncertainty. Kris would begin working at her mother's candle store and pick up a second job at a donut shop. Soon enough, the family bought a beautiful home in University City, a brand new neighborhood where everything was new. She wrote, quote, "It was a neighborhood full of kids with brand new schools, brand new houses, brand new everything." Kris was now thriving in her community and living her best life. She had a great social life and was quite privileged. She wrote, quote, "I knew that I had a beautiful life. I loved hanging out with my friends, weekends at the beach. When I turned 16, Harry surprised me with a brand new car, a red Mazda RX-2. I would often drive that red Mazda east on the freeway thinking about my plan." What was her plan? Well, she wanted to get married and have 6 kids, but she wanted to marry an adult, not someone her own age. Instead of running around trying to find a prom dress, Kris was looking for a man to marry. She wrote, quote, "I was determined to make something of myself one day. But in those days, my idea of success was getting married and having babies. 6 babies. Boyfriends? Sure, I dated a few, but I always saw myself as being with an adult. I was biding my time. At that age, most girls were thinking about prom. I was thinking, F the prom. I want to get married and have 6 kids. I felt like life would start to begin when I got that done."
You said something interesting once. Girls my age were thinking about the prom. I was thinking, the prom. I want to get married and have 6 kids.
True. So true. When I was 16, all I wanted to do was have 6 kids. Isn't that crazy?
Well, it's crazy to me because I'm hearing 2 different Kris Jenners. I'm hearing a Kris Jenner who wants nothing more than to get married and have 6 kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm hearing about a Kris Jenner who is interested in business, work ethic, going into the candle store, doing a good job.
Mm-hmm. And I'm here to say you can do both.
As a teenager living in Southern California, Kris would often have lunches and dinners at the country club with her parents. She fully consumed the sophistication of the country clubs. They write, quote, "Wealth and social status were intoxicating to her. She observed how the socialite wives of these rich men dressed and behaved. She studied every crazy detail of club life, analyzing the many courses of fine cuisine and how meals were presented. She pored over the wine list and noted how patrons sniffed the glasses of the elegant brandies. It was an education she found more interesting and exciting than her high school courses. Socially, her status as a cheerleader at Claremont High ensured she was popular, but she wasn't interested in silly teenage chatter. Kris was far more interested in older men who were established, and she was well aware of how they treated her. They didn't treat her like your average teenager. They wrote, quote, "The men couldn't help but notice her. Most of them were much older and married. It did wonders for her self-confidence whenever these successful men glanced her way and let her know by how they looked at her that they found her attractive and desirable. She was not only a stunning brunette, but was also charming and fun. She instinctively knew men loved being heard. Men felt she heard and understood them. It was all research for learning how men operate. It was an education for Kris to discover that wealth and privilege could be easily obtained." In 1973, for her high school graduation, Kris's best friend's mother bought the girls tickets to Hawaii to attend the Hawaiian Open with a man named Phil, who was a professional golfer and well-known. While there, 17-year-old Kris met another professional golfer who she called Anthony in her book. His real name was Cesar Sanudo, and he was 12 years older than her. She wrote, quote, "He was tall, dark-haired, funny, and successful, and he represented this glamorous world of golf. Maybe I was just a golf groupie, but I liked him immediately. He made all the boys I'd hung out with in high school seem like, well, boys. He was my first grown-up, non-high school boyfriend." The 29-year-old had won a PGA event in 1970 and was on his way to being a very successful golfer. When he saw 17-year-old Kris at the Hawaiian Open, he was immediately attracted to her. Cesar was very charming and caught Kris's eye too. It must be noted that Cesar's daughter Amber later told the Daily Mail that, quote, He told me she told him she was 21, but she was only 17. 17-year-old Kris and 29-year-old Caesar began dating, and though she was very young, surprisingly, her family supported the relationship. He was a pro golfer, and her family loved to golf. They would go to his tournaments and enjoy the perks that their relationship offered. She wrote, quote, "My parents loved that whole lifestyle. So when I ran off to golf tournaments, they said, have fun. Caesar courted me. He showed me things I had never seen, taking me to PGA events in these beautiful places and resorts. Soon, I was traveling with Caesar to Japan, Scotland, London, Mexico City. I spent a year traveling with him. Dating someone who was a pro golfer was thrilling." Caesar exposed Kris to a certain lifestyle that she would become obsessed with. Eventually, she was able to convince him to let her and her best friend Debbie live in his townhouse in Mission Beach, free of charge. She wrote, quote, "Of course, I have to admit, we were a little con artist. We told Caesar that since he was on his way to being a truly big-time golfer, he needed us to live in his house and watch his plants and take care of things for him." Kris had no plans to go to college. What was more important to her was finding a wealthy man to marry and have 6 kids with. Her relationship with Caesar had potential for those desires. He wined and dined her, provided for her, and connected her to other wealthy people. They wrote, quote, "For the next year, Caesar was Kris's career. She might as well have been his manager." Kris took advantage of Caesar's popularity and made connections with the most successful, prominent people in their circle. Eventually, she began thinking beyond San Diego and began to set her sights on Los Angeles. She made a life for herself in Beverly Hills and socialized with Hollywood producers and movie stars. One day, she thought it would be a good idea to go to the Del Mar racetrack, 20 miles from San Diego, with some girlfriends. Kris wrote, quote, "Going to the Del Mar was exciting because it was such an example of wealth and high society. The clothes were amazing and the fashion was over the top." Kris was set on meeting more prominent people at the racetrack, but had no clue her future husband was there.
So I was wearing this necklace when I met Robert Kardashian.
Really?
And I was 17 years old. He came up to me looking like Tony Orlando, you know, with high platform shoes.
I actually see
the whole
that.
nine.
No, I actually see
the
that.
whole nine. And he had a suit on, and he was at the racetrack with his dad and his brother. And he came up and, you know, had some smooth line.
Robert Kardashian was a 30-year-old Beverly Hills attorney and music executive who decided to take a break from work and head to the racetrack with his brother and their father. Kris details how Robert Kardashian stalked her the rest of the day at Del Mar, watching her every move and keeping a good eye on her. The authors write, quote, "He was smitten by the beautiful, feisty brunette who reminded him of movie star Natalie Wood. Robert reckoned Kris could not have been more than 18, yet she handled herself like a seasoned woman. After contacting Kris for over a year and being shot down at every corner, she finally agreed to go on a date with Robert. But there was a problem. She failed to tell him that Caesar had recently proposed, and she was a promised woman. She wrote, quote, "The Caesar thing seemed serious, but I think I loved the lifestyle more than the man. He proposed, and I had been having so much fun dating him that I thought that saying yes was the right thing to do. But as time passed, I started to realize that I didn't really want to marry him. At 19, I was too young to be engaged to anyone."
I had a boyfriend.
I think you had a
that
fiance.
Yeah, well, kind of, sort of. Yeah,
He was a golfer, right?
yes.
So
Yeah.
you're going out with this golfer,
Mm-hmm.
kind of sort of his
Kind of, sort of his
fiance.
fiance.
Yeah. And then you start dating Robert.
Yeah, well, yeah. Robert he was irresistible.
Robert flew from Los Angeles to San Diego to see Kris. They went out to see a movie and made their way back to Caesar's condo. As they were getting a little frisky upstairs, Kris heard the front door open. Caesar was home. She wrote, quote, "Kris, I heard him calling from downstairs. I looked at Robert, and Robert looked at me. Oh crap, we were so busted. We flew to our feet, but we were stuck upstairs in Caesar's townhome. We couldn't jump out of a second-story window. I couldn't hide Robert in the closet. Let's make a run for it," I said, and we went running down the stairs right past Caesar. Caesar started to grab Robert, and I immediately realized Robert was not a fighter. He was standing there in his designer jeans, Gucci loafers, and a gorgeous Gucci sweater with an anchor knitted into it. Caesar tore Robert's Gucci sweater in half and about to lay into his face when Robert broke free from his grasp and bolted for the door. He ran like hell, terrified of this pro golfer ready to tear him a new one. Kris grabbed her car keys, hopped in her Mazda, and drove after Robert with Caesar in tow.
Robert came over one day when Caesar was out of town.
What? Mom! Were you hooking up with him?
Yeah.
Oh my God, you're such a whore! Now we know where we get it from.
And then we went back to Caesar's house, and lo and behold, Caesar came home to surprise me.
And what happened?
Well, it wasn't pretty.
Did they get into a fist fight?
Not proud of it. Actually, Caesar tried to grab his sweater. I think he ripped a hole in Robert's sweater. I didn't want to ever hurt anybody's feelings.
Over the past year, Kris had grown to really care for Robert. During their conversations on the phone, she came to learn a lot about him. She came to learn that Robert was born into privilege, comfort, and wealth. His parents were still madly in love and had been married at that point for over 40 years. He was religious, coming from a strong Christian background. He was also educated, successful, and handsome. Robert was very influential in his community and ran with some very established people. He and his brother Tommy lived in Beverly Hills and drove Rolls Royces. Robert was living the high life, a life that Kris wanted to be a part of. After their disastrous first date, Robert stopped contacting Kris, and it would be a long time until she heard from him again. Caesar would forgive her for her indiscretions and credit them to her being young and immature. He would, however, spend less time traveling and more time at home to keep a close watch over his young fiancée. After years of rebuilding her relationship with her father, Kris received an unexpected phone call on Easter Sunday in 1975. It was her grandfather, True, on the other line, and he had some very devastating news. Kris wrote, quote, "I was standing in the kitchen at Caesar's house when the phone rang. It was my paternal grandfather. I have some really bad news," he said. "Your dad's been in a terrible accident, and he didn't make it." Kris's father was in Mexico with plans to marry his girlfriend the following day. Trying to avoid a collision with an 18-wheeler, his car ran off the road and crashed. A group of nuns found the wreckage and took him to the closest hospital. He succumbed to his wounds and died at the age of 42. Kris was shattered because prior to him leaving for Mexico, he called her up and wanted to spend time together before he left. She was tired and declined the offer.
My real biological father's name was Robert, and he was in a car accident when he went on vacation. And it was abrupt and really, it was horrible. It was so many years ago now. You have your heart has time to heal, and you always regret what you never got to say.
While Kris was overseas in Europe with Caesar, Robert was planning a housewarming party and asked Kris to be his date. Kris told Robert that she would gladly be his date and that she was going to break up with her fiancé. Robert went to the airport to pick her up with a bouquet of roses. After seeing the last person depart from the plane, Robert realized Kris was a no-show. She wrote, quote, "I had made him look like a fool. He didn't have a girlfriend. He didn't have a date. This was his big, huge party, and I had blown him off. But like the matriarchs in her family, she was prideful and refused to contact him, as she was taught to never chase a man. She couldn't leave Caesar without a backup plan. She had no place to go, no money, and prayed for an escape. And that day would come." Shortly after the couple returned from Europe, Kris discovered that Caesar had been having an affair with a much younger woman. She wrote, quote, "I was so mad but also glad. Now I had a backup plan. I had been too weak to break up with him. Now Caesar had made things easy for me. I packed my bags and put everything in my car thinking I wasn't raised to be a victim. I was raised to be a strong, confident girl who knows when it's time to fold him. I waited until he came home. And when he walked through the door, I told him that we were done. I went to my mother's house and called Robert. 'It's over. I'm done,' I said. I got dressed, got on a plane, and flew to LA, where I rushed out of the airport to meet Robert Kardashian for our first legitimate date. Sitting in a green Mercedes waiting for me at the curb were Robert and O.J. Simpson. Kris was now off in Los Angeles while Caesar was recovering from more than a broken heart. His brother Rudy said the following, quote, "She really did a number on my brother. She was a gold-digging snake. Caesar told me that when Kris took off, she stole his collection of gold coins out of his house. They were Mexican 50 pesos, gold pieces. They were worth $10,000. He never got a penny back." Kris always envisioned herself living a life of luxury and knew that Robert Kardashian was already considered an elite man, and now she was meeting the football star O.J. Simpson, and she hadn't even been in LA for 5 minutes. When they made it to Robert's house, it was every bit magnificent as she presumed it to be. His house was spectacular. OJ was also staying at the house because he was separated from his first wife. Robert would take Kris to meet his family and pretty much told them that he felt she was the one. One weekend, after a romantic whirlwind, Robert made his move and asked Kris if she would marry him. He was beaming with excitement and told all his family and friends his plan to propose. He was surprised, however, when Kris said no. In her mind, it was too soon. They had only been dating a few weeks. She just ended her engagement to a man she was with for almost 2 years, and on top of that, she was only 19 years old. When Kris went back home to San Diego, she concluded that she needed to take control over her life and applied at American Airlines to become a flight attendant. Within a week, she was accepted and flown out to Texas for training. Robert went from devastated to angry. She wrote, quote, "Robert wasn't happy. He took it personally and believed that by turning him down and preparing to fly off into the sunset with American Airlines, I was slamming his character and who he was as a human being. I still felt like I had made the right decision, and I certainly didn't think he would jump back into the dating scene immediately. When I flew away, he began dating someone else right away." Priscilla Presley. Though she had turned him down, Kris felt that his relationship with Priscilla was a slap in the face. Robert quickly moved Priscilla into his house while Kris was staying in the flight attendant's dormitory in Fort Worth. When Kris graduated from flight attendant school in August of 1976, she received a call from Robert with some shocking news. He and Priscilla had broken up, and he wanted to know where Kris would be stationed. Kris would meet up with Robert and OJ in New York. They would pick her up in a limousine and enjoy a night out on the town. After checking into the plaza, they went to a dinner at 21 and danced at Studio 54. Kris lived in New York for several months and was miserable. When she signed on to be a flight attendant, her preferred location was California. Unfortunately, she was based in New York instead. After much praying, her request to be based in Los Angeles was granted, and she was able to move back home and back to the high life she craved. She wrote, quote, "I got off the plane in LA, my city, the city of the man I loved, or at least the man I thought I loved. Waiting for me at the curb at LAX in his new black Rolls Royce was my prince, Robert Kardashian. On Easter Sunday in 1978, her prince would get down on one knee and ask her to be his wife for a second time. This time, however, she would say yes." While busy planning her wedding, Kris ran into OJ, who was sitting in Robert's office one day. He asked Kris to make a phone call for him. He wanted her to call a girl that he was interested in, but since she lived at home with her parents, he thought it was best to have Kris call instead. He said this girl was about 18 years old and beautiful. Kris picked up the phone and called the house of this girl. That girl was Nicole Simpson. In her book, Kris writes that she was very angry with OJ and didn't agree with his actions. She wrote, quote, "I told him this because he was still married to his first wife, and Nicole was apparently young. He was so smitten, so taken with her, he couldn't help himself. He was not going to take no for an answer. OJ never took no for an answer."
Kris helped OJ call the beautiful blonde waitress named Nicole Brown that he had met at a Beverly Hills restaurant.
Nicole was how old at the time?
18.
And you were how old?
I believe 28, 29 maybe.
29?
Yeah.
Were you married?
Yes.
When Kris officially met Nicole shortly after, they became instantaneous best friends. Robert and Kris were married in a big, beautiful, lavish wedding on July 8, 1978, in front of 300 guests. No expense was spared. Kris's dreams had finally come true. Ever since she was a teenager, she wanted to find a well-off man, get married, and have 6 kids. Robert promised her that life. She wrote, quote, "He made everything magical for me. He told me that he couldn't wait for us to begin our life together. He wanted to take care of me, to create for me the best, sweetest life possible. And he did just that." He bought Kris whatever she wanted, from diamond wristwatches to earrings to exclusive vacations, and the list goes on. Everything was blissful and perfect. 9 weeks after their honeymoon, Kris found out they were expecting. In the early morning hours of April 18, 1979, a daughter was born. They named her Courtney, with a K.
I married Robert when I was 22 years old and I got pregnant on my honeymoon. And believe me, all the Armenian ladies were counting. They were like, and thank God I had Courtney 9 months, 2 weeks, and 2 days, I think, to the day.
They were doting parents and had a very difficult time being away from their daughter. According to Kris, Courtney had them wrapped around her finger. In 1979, Robert was thriving in his career. His radio and records publication, which was a company he owned that was essentially a newspaper for the music industry, sold for over $12 million, putting several millions in his pocket. With this money, he bought Kris her dream house in Beverly Hills, a 7,000 square foot 2-story manor. The Cape Cod-style house had a swimming pool, poolside bar, jacuzzi, tennis courts, and all the perks you would hope to find in a multi-million-dollar home. Robert and Kris would host barbecues at their house every Sunday and invite very elite, well-known celebrities over. Eventually, their parties became the talk of the town. With a full-time housekeeper, Kris was able to go and come as she pleased, frequently going on shopping trips on Rodeo Drive with her girlfriends and enjoying the financial abundance she and Robert had. They write, quote, "She played tennis at the Beverly Hills Country Club and volunteered for seats on committees for charitable organizations. She was meticulous in choosing the highest profile positions in the Beverly Hills community." On October 21st, 1980, Kimberly Kardashian was born, and Kris was in awe of her beauty. She wrote, quote, "Kimberly was absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. I remember walking downstairs to find Robert and Kimberly, who was lying in her bassinet. Robert had her dressed in baby Dior with a pink satin bonnet. I looked at her face and thought, she is so beautiful. She was just stunning from the beginning." Kris was now 24 with 2 small kids and often found herself overwhelmed, but that didn't stop her from trying to be the perfect wife and mother. She wrote, quote, "From 1980 to 1983, I was all about being the perfect wife and mother, raising babies, forming traditions, and settling into my life's dream. We had amazing people working for us, and I would make sure the house was picture perfect. I made breakfast for the babies, I played tennis with my friends, and I met friends for lunch. Everything in Kris's life was perfect. She had the perfect husband, the perfect kids, the perfect house, and things were going to get even better. On June 27, 1984, a 3rd daughter was born. They named her Chloe, with a K. Kris wrote, quote, "Like her name, Chloe looked different from everyone else in the family, from the moment she was born. She had blonde hair and these greenish eyes. She looked a lot like my maternal grandmother, Lou Ethel, and Robert's mother, Helen. Courtney and Kimberly came out dark and Armenian looking, and Chloe arrived looking nothing like them. Though Chloe looked different than her older sisters, they all loved her just the same. Kris was well on her way to having the 6 kids she dreamed of, but after having 3 girls, they really wanted a boy heir. So she began reading up on what they could do to assist in that goal. After months of trying certain positions and having sex on a schedule, Kris found out she was expecting. On March 17, 1987, they welcomed their 4th baby, and to their delight, it was a boy. They named him Robert Arthur Kardashian, after his father. Kris was living the life she always envisioned for herself. She now had 4 children, which included their much-desired boy, lived in their dream home, had amazing parties, and she was now considered a socialite.
November 5th, and now I'm 30, riding down life's highway with my friends at my side. My life without them wouldn't be complete. They are my joy and pride. I've learned a lot from all my good friends about turning 30. I'm the last to reach that stop. We're gonna party till we just can't party no more. We're big on carpools, Judith Lever, Bible study, Cheesecake Factory, Talarico, Auntie Barbara's, Joyce's parties, lots of tennis, baby showers, birthday parties, Valentino, church on Sundays, everybody very happy, cause the girls are shining all the time. It's like another fun-filled day. I love my friends.
Kris wrote, quote, "It was 1988, and everything was still right with the world. I had a wonderful husband and 4 gorgeous children. Everything was perfect. I was blessed in so many ways. I had no idea that within a year I would come close to losing everything." At the beginning of 1989, Kris's perfect world would come crashing down. She and Robert had been married for 10 years and had the most amazing life. Yet, she was unhappy. She wrote, quote, "I was selfish and restless and bored. My feelings for Robert had changed. I still loved him, but I soon began to realize that I wasn't in love with him.
I had the happiest life you could have dreamt about. But when you're in something, sometimes people think the grass is always greener. And that was like what I think I went through at some point. When I look back on it now, probably one of my biggest regrets in my life is that marriage fell apart. You do stupid things when you're young and, not experienced with relationships. And that's not an excuse. It's just to say that just young and dumb.
Kris would begin spending time out with her girlfriends partying, drinking, and coming home in the wee hours of the morning. Her behavior really concerned Robert, who would confide in his best friend Joni. Joni said, quote, Kris wanted to go out and party and recapture the youth she never had because she was home making babies. With Kris's late nights, Robert couldn't help but wonder if she was cheating on him. After Chloe was born, he wondered if she was his biological daughter. When she was born, Robert kept saying, well, she has blonde hair just like my mother. I said, if she isn't yours, what would you do? He said, I would still love her. I would never ever give her up. I'm her father. Reports have surfaced that Kris enjoyed a few flings around the time Chloe was conceived. There's been wide speculation that O.J. Simpson was one of her lovers, and the family has been plagued by years of rumors that O.J. is the biological father of Chloe, with no conclusive results to date.
Bob Kardashian, he's like a brother to me. He's a great guy. He met and married Kris, and they really had a terrific time together when they were together. Unfortunately, that ended. But never, and I want to stress, never in any way, shape, or form had I ever had any interest in Kris, romantically, sexually, and I never got any indication that she had any interest in me. So all of these stories are just bogus, bad, tasteless. Chloe, like all the girls I'm very proud of, just like I know Bob would be if he was here, but the simple facts of the matter is she's not mine. Now, one of the people who's spreading this rumor is a guy that the media loves to say is my manager. I had one manager in my whole life, Chuck Barnes, when I came out of USC for 3 years. Unfortunately, he died about 45 years ago, but even before he died, I opened my own office with the help of Skip Taft, my lawyer, my two assistants, Marilyn O'Brien, the late Marilyn O'Brien, and Kathy Randa. And I've always managed my own affairs, and I like to think very successfully.
On a couple's trip to New York, she would confide in her best friend Nicole that she was struggling in her marriage. By that time, Nicole had married OJ and they had 2 kids. Kris wrote, quote, Nicole was struggling with OJ's infidelities and with the way he treated her. She also told me about him getting physical and roughing her up. She didn't go into much detail, but she was just really having a hard time. Kris also stated how every time Nicole tried to leave OJ, he wouldn't let her go. A month after their couple's trip to New York, OJ beat Nicole up pretty bad. She wrote, quote, about a month after the trip to New York, OJ beat the crap out of Nicole, and she finally had the nerve to call the police. The problem was that most of the policemen who patrolled OJ's neighborhood were OJ's friends.
911 emergency.
Can you get someone over here now to 325 Gretna Green? He's back. Please.
Okay, what does he look like?
He's O.J. Simpson. I think you know his record. Could you just send somebody over here?
Okay, what is he doing there?
He just drove up again.
He just drove up.
Over?
Okay, wait a minute. What kind of car is he in?
He's in a white Bronco. But first of all, he broke the back door down to get in.
Okay, wait a minute. What's your name?
Nicole Simpson.
Okay, is he the sportscaster or whatever?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wait a minute. We're sending the police. What is he doing? Is he threatening you?
I'm going nuts.
Okay. Has he threatened you in any way, or is he just harassing you?
You're going to hear him in a minute. He's about to come in again.
Okay, just stay on the line.
I don't want to stay on the line. He's going to beat the shit.
Wait a minute. Wait. Just stay on the line so we can know what's going on till the police get there. Okay. Okay, Nicole.
Uh-huh.
Kris admits that during this time, she didn't ask enough questions or really take into account how serious the situation was between OJ and Nicole. But she would find out soon enough. After asking Robert for a trial separation, Kris depicts the following, quote, Armenians don't get separated, Robert said. It's either marriage or divorce. After much hesitation, Robert gave in and agreed to a separation. He packed some things and headed off to Palm Springs, to his parents' house. Kris was relieved. She felt like she could breathe and could be more independent with him gone. She wrote, quote, I had gone from being a teenager to being the mother of 4 children. I now had my 4th baby. I had lost the pregnancy weight, I had a boob job, and I was finally feeling good about myself again. I wanted to have some fun. On a night out at her girlfriend's house, she saw 23-year-old Todd Waterman, a man she had seen out on the town before. After flirting with each other all night, Todd made his move. Kris wrote, quote, I went upstairs to get the boombox. Todd followed, running right upstairs behind me. And then boom, he kissed me. And I kissed him back. That kiss was more than amazing. It was like a revival, a resuscitation, an awakening from some long, deep, unconscious sleep. I hadn't been like that in 10 years. It made me feel young, attractive, sexy, and alive. I had not felt that way with Robert for years.
I thought I knew it all. I was young and, you think you're smarter than everybody else. And I had been with Robert since I was 17 years old. So that's a long time, and had 4 beautiful children and had like a fairy tale life.
That's practically your daughter's age.
I know.
And then, so when you were bored or not feeling as where you felt you needed to be in your marriage, you write about having an affair. And do you regret revealing that now?
No.
You don't regret?
No. Okay. No.
Kris wouldn't hide her affair, and Robert started to put 2 and 2 together. One day, he followed her to a restaurant where she met up with her lover. She wrote, quote, "Todd and I were alone in a booth having breakfast. I was sitting in the booth facing out when the door opened and Robert came walking toward me. 'I caught you,' Robert yelled. He ran out of the restaurant. I ran after him. He jumped in his car and drove away. I got into my car and followed him." According to Todd's mother, Kris had told them she was separated. She said, quote, "I had no idea she was married. She told us that she was separated. She would always come along with us to events, and that's why I thought she was separated, because they went everywhere together." Fed up with his wife's affair, Robert began documenting her indiscretions in a journal. On December 15, 1989, he wrote the following, quote, "Todd drove up back to the gate and parked. He went into the house and slept in my bed. Chloe and Robert were in the house. Closer to Christmas Day, she doesn't care." On Christmas, he wrote, quote, "I was home alone with 4 kids. After months of chasing Kris around town, catching her in the act, Robert finally moved out and would subsequently file for divorce. He was officially done with Kris. After being served divorce papers at her house, Kris started freaking out because up until this point, she was a housewife whose husband took care of everything financially. She wrote, quote, "I didn't have access to any money. I had never paid a bill. I didn't even know how much we paid the gardener. I couldn't tell you what we owed on the house. I never wrote a check, ever. My husband paid the bills. He wrote the checks. He handled the money. I had no money. I had no power."
When he filed for divorce, that was pretty devastating for you.
Yeah, because it made it real. Like, you think you're going to come through this period, I thought, and everything is going to be okay. And then all of a sudden it wasn't. So that was really hard for me.
And it was also hard in the money department.
Oh, yeah. I didn't have anything. I went to the market one day and my, credit card didn't work. I had a market credit card and I'm like, I can't even buy a tomato.
When Robert and Kris sat the kids down to tell them the fate of their marriage, they took it really hard. Courtney was 11, Kim was 10, Chloe 6, and Robert 2. Their whole world and what they knew it to be was disrupted. Kris thought she could ride off into the sunset with then 24-year-old Todd. She wrote, quote, "Life with Todd wasn't all it was cracked up to be. He lived in a tiny, dumpy apartment in the valley, and I lived in a 7,000 square foot mansion with Gates and Dobermans and Rolls Royces. I had thought there was this special connection and a future between Todd and me, but now I know that the affair was more about running away from Robert than running to Todd." But Kris wouldn't let Todd go. She wouldn't let him go even when she caught him red-handed in bed with another woman. She held on to that relationship for a few more months, but after going to a ski resort and seeing Todd flirt with the Hawaiian tropic girls, it was over. Kris was done. When she broke up with Todd, she realized how much of a mess she had caused and that she lost a really great man. She wrote, quote, "Suddenly I realized everything that was great about my marriage. Robert was the greatest guy in the world. He would never cheat on me. He only wanted the best for me. He encouraged me to find things to do for myself and have new interests. He took me on vacation, bought me anything I wanted, and let me be the best mother I could be. He nurtured our relationship. Robert made me a better person. He introduced me to a life I would have never known otherwise. When I lost him, I lost friends, I lost respect, and I lost love."
Wrote in the book about an affair that you had on your late husband, Robert Kardashian, with a guy that you thought would then turn into the next man, but you walked in on the next man in bed with another woman.
It really sucked. Yeah, that was a bad time in my life. I had met Robert when I was a teenager. we had been together for many, many years and had a lot of kids. And I think I just kind of grew into a really bad place in my marriage, that I wasn't really old enough to realize that marriage does have its ups and downs. And I talk a lot about that in the book to kind of give other people, an insight into how I was feeling.
Yeah.
I walk you through my whole divorce, and I had an affair, and how horrible it was on my self-esteem and how it all turned out. And I thought like life was just over. I learned from all those mistakes. I do call my divorce my greatest, regret in my life. I mean, that was my lowest of lows.
Their divorce was nasty. The Unofficial Autobiography writes the following, quote, "In her response, Kris stated that she and Robert, the petitioner, shared a luxury lifestyle. Nothing was too good for our family," she wrote. "The New Year's Eve party alone cost between $10,000 to $12,000. Even our children's clothing was purchased at exclusive boutiques. Kris's attorney petitioned the courts for a monthly allowance of $37,189. Robert's team rejected it. Robert not only portrayed his wife as an adulteress and absentee mom, but also accused her of physical abuse. Robert extracted notes from the secret diary he kept between 1989 and 1990 to support his claims. On March 20th, 1990, he wrote the following, quote, "Courtney started crying. She was sad because mommy wasn't home at all. Courtney wanted her to cook dinner for them. How sad that a child had to beg her mother to cook her dinner and be home with her."
Do not give mom the benefit of the doubt ever from your childhood, and it's really unfair.
You have your own Todd right now.
No, I actually don't. I'm actually not married.
Right, but
and I'm not having an affair. You can't compare one to the other. That's absolutely not true.
Robert and Kris were ordered to see psychiatrists individually. The psychiatrist who interviewed Kris found her to be living in a fairy tale world with a, quote, Cinderella attitude, where situations resulted in everyone living happily ever after. Furthermore, the report stated, quote, "Her sense of self is based much more on fantasy than realistic considerations. She was labeled manipulative and demanding, and she rated high on the narcissistic scale."
I didn't know any different. And my dream in my life was to have 6 kids and have this big, huge, happy family that, sat around the fireplace on Christmas Eve and drank hot cocoa waiting for Santa. I mean, I'm totally a romantic, hopelessly have these fantasies about family life. And I wanted to see if I could raise my children to kind of have the same dreams and goals and visions that I did about family. And they did. I think it's all about, it's like somebody, giving a party. It's what you put into it. It's what you can design it any way you want. When you raise kids, I read a book once called Children Are Wet Cement. And it was, somebody gave it to me when I was a very young mom. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting. The things that you teach your children and that we raise our kids to be. I mean, for me, it was, God first, family second, being a good person, all those things that you try to instill in your children.
In the midst of her divorce, Kris dated here and there, but after a few terrible dates, she vowed to put dating on hold and focus on her children. That lasted briefly. Kris would meet Olympic gold medalist Bruce Jenner, now known as Caitlyn. She wrote, quote, "My friend Candace was up in Alaska shooting an outdoors television show when she ran into Bruce Jenner. Bruce wore sweatpants pretty much every day, so she thought that maybe I could help him with his style. Candace always dressed like a Ralph Lauren model, and Bruce commented on how great she looked. Candace would call up Kris and convince her to go out with Caitlyn, as she thought they would be the perfect match. A few days after this phone call, the four would go on a double date. Kris wasn't excited about the situation, but Candace was persistent. She wrote, quote, "You're perfect for each other," Candace said. "He's got 4 kids, you've got 4 kids. It's going to be great. You could really use a good guy, and Bruce is a great guy. He's not dating anybody. It's perfect timing." The foursome ate dinner at the Ivy and then went back to Candace's house, where Kris and Caitlyn stayed up all night talking about their life stories and the things they had in common. Caitlyn shared with Kris her disappointment about her 2 failed marriages and business ventures that hadn't succeeded, which made Kris feel sorry for her. She wrote, quote, "I couldn't help but feel compassion for him. I also found myself thinking that I might want to be the person to help Bruce find his way again. From then on, Bruce and I became inseparable.
So you're 35 years old.
Yep.
You are divorced and single again.
Mm-hmm.
And you swear off men.
I did. I did. And I swore off men. And 2 weeks later, Candace Garvey and her husband Steve called and said, "Have we got a guy for you?" And met Bruce Jenner.
2 weeks later.
Yeah, 2 weeks after I said, "I'm never going out with another guy again. I'm done with men."
So what was it that made Bruce swear you back on men?
Well, we went out on a date and we went to the Ivy at the Shore with Candace and Steve and had a great dinner and just clicked.
The kids welcomed Caitlyn into the family, except Courtney, the eldest. She seemed to have a harder time accepting the relationship and her parents' divorce. Though the couple had a few bumps to overcome, things between them moved quickly, and after only 5 months of dating, they were married. They wed April 21st, 1991, exactly 7 months after they first met. Caitlyn and Kris, along with their family, moved to a house in Malibu and gave Kris's marital home to Robert. Kris was ready for a fresh start and wanted to get out of Beverly Hills, where she was the talk of the town for cheating on her husband with a younger man. Things seemed to be moving forward for Kris. It wouldn't take long, though, for Kris to come up with a plan on how she could help Caitlyn expand her career and create financial abundance for the family. She wrote, quote, "We went to work rebuilding Bruce's career, with me as his manager by default. Suddenly, I went from being a housewife to having a job. I had to buckle down and figure out a way to make a life for Bruce and me. We're going to take the moment that you shine brightest in your life and make sure no one will forget," I told Bruce. "There should be Bruce Jenner clothing, Bruce Jenner exercise products, Bruce Jenner endorsement deals, Bruce Jenner vitamin supplements. We'll build this house one speech and one endorsement at a time."
It was very interesting because he had probably $200 in the bank. And I didn't have much more than that. And I had some child support. And we thought, okay, well, now what are we going to do with 10 kids, or 8 kids at the time? And it was very interesting because we weren't thinking. We just kind of dove into a situation. And suddenly we were left with a situation that looked really great on the outside, but we were in trouble on the inside. And there's a lot of people that do live paycheck to paycheck, although our paychecks were a little bit larger than other people's, but it was still a struggle. And I, thought, how are we going to make a life together? How is he going to make a living? What are we going to do? What am I going to do? And I didn't have a lot of hands-on work experience, although I had been in the business world, just because I was married to an executive the first part of my life. And I learned so much just paying attention and being around. Anyway, Bruce and I tried to figure it out, and it was a struggle. And then one day I just had to roll up my sleeves and thought, this isn't working. What are we going to do? And that's when I became Bruce's manager. And we just started deciding that I was going to, this was before there was really a lot of email, and it was like snail mail. Anytime you wanted to get a message out to somebody, you mailed it. If you wanted to reach a lot of people, corporate executives, anybody like that. And Bruce Jenner had a speech that he gave called Finding the Champion Within. And we sat down and I said, you need to go and do these motivational speeches like you used to do around the country, around the world, and we are going to tell everybody about it. And I didn't know how I was going to do that. So I grabbed my buddy, who then became my assistant. She was amazing. And we spread all over the living room floor that had no furniture in it, just every single piece of material we could find. And we made press kits out of nothing. I had a Xerox machine that was like, on just auto drive. And we mailed 7,000 things to everybody we could think of. Visa, Coca-Cola, every single company, Carl's Jr., Jack in the Box. We just started mailing these things to corporate executives.
And waiting for them to hire.
And we waited
Bruce.
for the phone to ring. And the phone started to ring. And then we couldn't keep up with the call. I'm like, this is amazing. This is really working. So he was back on the road doing his motivational speaking. We raised his price because I thought, well, he's just not charging enough. It's got to be something that they really want and they almost can't have.
Kris was on her way of turning Caitlyn into a money-making machine, but there was a secret she was keeping. Caitlyn felt that she was a woman trapped in a man's body and wanted to transition. According to Caitlyn and her ex-wife Linda, she told Kris this information. In her memoir, Linda writes, quote, "Bruce told me that he was stopping the hormones and that Kris was okay with everything."
We'll take the last one with Kris. I was open with her about my issues. I had been on hormones for 4.5 years and really struggling back in the late 80s.
How'd she handle it?
She says, we can handle it. And I said, you know what? And at that time in my life, because I couldn't do it, I thought I would transition before I was 40. I said, I'm doing this. I don't want to be old and do this. I want to do it when I'm younger. So that was like 1984 to 1990. Those 6 years, I was on hormones. I had a little bit of surgery done. I had all my electrolysis done on my face and had all these things that I was going through, thinking, I'm going to do this before I'm 40. I got to 39, could not go any further. It just wasn't time. I just wasn't time. Within society, for me, it wasn't time. And about 4 or 5 months after that, I met Kris. And we hit it off from day one. And I had to be honest with her. I am sure I downplayed it because at that time I was downplaying it, And we both thought we can handle this and not a big deal. And let's have a good life together. So for the next 23 years, we had a very good life together.
Why is she so mad at this book?
As Caitlyn struggled with her gender issues, Kris began controlling every aspect of her life, from firing her longtime friend and manager, to forcing her to cut off communication with her ex-wife Linda, to even creating distance between her and her 4 children. Kris cleaned house and wedged herself into any significant connection and friendship Caitlyn had. A close family friend said, quote, "When Kris says family first, she means her family. She's extremely possessive in all of her relationships. She doesn't like attention divided from her. If it's her kids, her mother, it's still all about Kris." In the Unofficial Autobiography, the authors write, quote, "According to those who knew her best, her need for attention and admiration is as vital as the air she breathes. She is addicted to the release of the chemical oxytocin. When the praise and accolades soften to a whisper, she has to find new fans to applaud her. Kris likes money, and a lot of it, because it buys her acceptance. But you give her a choice between money and recognition or fame, she'll choose attention. She can always get more money, but she can't get enough attention." Soon, Kris began encouraging Caitlyn to go to celebrity events and parties where they could get exposure. When they went to these parties, they were on fire and lit up the room. Soon enough, they were known as the new it couple.
Okay, kids. Yeah, see, I'm interrupting the Jenners. This is Bruce Jenner and, well, his lovely wife, Kris. And you do look gorgeous.
Rhonda.
Now, first of all, I want to speak to Kris first because you went along with the NCA rule of tonight's party, the no cleavage allowed. You didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, I did. NCA, honey, it's a new term.
It's a new term.
It is. I do like that.
A new deal at Oscar night, but you all look absolutely the most glamorous, most beautiful couple in all of Hollywood.
Oh, thank you.
She tied the tie. Is it still straight?
No, honey.
No, sorry.
I love this couple.
Kris's former friends who had written her off because of what she had done to Robert started to forgive her, and one of those friends was Nicole Simpson. By the time Kris and Caitlyn got married, Nicole and OJ had separated and gotten back together multiple times. In 1993, during another separation, Caitlyn, Kris, Nicole, and other friends would fly out to Mexico to get away from LA. OJ caught wind and had a fit. Kris writes, quote, "OJ went crazy on the phone calls. He could be pretty persistent when he wanted to be, and started calling the house and all of our cell phones. Because it was Mexico, it was hard to get calls in and out during that time. Still, enough of his calls got through and it was absolutely nutty." She wrote, quote, "He wanted to control her, and he wanted to control that trip. I have to admit, I felt really bad for OJ then. Obviously, I didn't have a crystal ball to see what was coming, but I could tell OJ was in panic mode and that he needed someone to help calm him down. He was way out of control. And when somebody shows you that side of their personality, you just can't explain it away." After their trip, Nicole and OJ separated, and she would subsequently file for divorce. Kris would help Nicole move into her new residence, 875 South Bundy. Kris wrote, quote, "I woke up early the morning after Sydney's dance recital. On the way to drop the kids off at school, I called Nicole and got her answering machine. When I got back to the house at around 8:30, my assistant Lisa came in and told me that Judy, Nicole's mother, was on the phone. Judy was hysterical. Nicole's been shot, she said. Nicole's been shot and she didn't make it.
Her mom called me. I had known OJ since I was 17 years old. When I met Robert, I met OJ. So that was, a very long time ago. So he was like a big brother to me. And that morning, I was coming back from taking the kids to school. And I was supposed to meet Nicole. I was going to change and go meet her. And the phone rang. And my assistant said, Judy's on the phone. And I said, oh, tell her I'll call her right back. And then she talked to Judy for a second. She goes, no, you really need to take the call. And I picked up the phone and she actually said, Nicole's been shot. And I said, what? I said, okay, I'm on my way. Where do I go? And she said, no, she didn't make it. And I said, what do you mean she's been? And that was the information that Judy had at that very moment in time. And that was very early in the morning.
Yeah.
On the morning of June 12, 1994, Nicole and her friend Ron Goldman were found fatally stabbed outside her home. The scene of the crime was horrific. Every news outlet covered it, and their deaths spread nationwide. Nicole's estranged ex-husband, football legend O.J. Simpson, was the prime suspect.
So O.J., for those of you who don't know the story, O.J. Simpson was accused of killing Nicole Simpson. And you were good friends with her, but you didn't even realize that there was a going on.
I didn't know that there was a until we heard and saw it, the whole thing unfold like everybody else, and then heard the 911 tapes that had been, many of them, which were going to be used as evidence in the trial.
I can't believe that she was your friend and she didn't say to you, I'm in trouble and I need to get away from this guy.
Me and some of her other close friends all were really surprised and shocked by that because we felt like we really failed her as a friend.
Nicole's passing brought up a lot of feelings for Kris, feelings of regret. The day before she died, Nicole begged Kris to meet her at a restaurant, saying she had some very important information to tell her. Kris was busy that day and rescheduled their lunch. Upon her death, Denise, Nicole's sister, would inform her that Nicole wanted to show Kris photos that she took of her injuries caused by OJ. Nicole had kept evidence of domestic abuse in a security deposit box and was going to share this with Kris prior to her death. Kris knew Nicole looked up to her, and after hearing this news, she felt like she had let her down. Though Robert and OJ had been friends for years, Kris was shocked when she found out that he joined OJ's legal team. Kris felt that it was a huge betrayal. The exes who had spent the last few years rebuilding their friendship and mending their relationship were now at odds over this trial. As Robert defended OJ's innocence, Kris believed he was guilty.
Your ex-husband, Robert Kardashian, and the father of your two children, is one of O.J. Simpson's best friends, one of his lawyers. Do you discuss with Bob Kardashian this case at all?
No. No, the only thing I discuss with him is the children. We just keep it the kids and we don't get into it because I think what would happen is our opinions are so obviously black and white that what good is it going to do?
Have you talked to O.J. Simpson at all since this happened?
I've talked to him a few times from jail. He called me.
And what were those conversations like?
It was just, I believe that he was reaching out, and wanted to talk to me. And I've known him for 20 years.
This was considered the trial of the century. And though it was tragic, Kris would receive a lot of publicity and attention for being known as one of Nicole's best friends. She went on several shows and did interviews, appearances, etc. The OJ trial not only tore Kris and Robert's relationship apart, it also caused a divide within the nation. After covering this trial for over 8 months, the jury would finally reach a verdict.
All right, Mr. Simpson, would you please stand and face the jury? Mrs. Robertson.
Superior Court of California, County of Los Angeles, in the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097211. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187.
Kris was shocked, and so was Robert Kardashian. She wrote, quote, "The words burned in my brain. Robert had the most serious expression on his face the entire time that both of the verdicts were being read. It almost seemed like disbelief. He didn't smile or hug OJ. He just looked right at him and then turned back to face the jury. I looked over at OJ. He broke into that soon-to-be infamous little grin the moment the words 'not guilty' rang through the air. He shot a little wave to the jury and mouthed the words, "Thank you." With the trial now over, Kris and Caitlyn would welcome their first child together, Kendall Nicole Jenner. They would then move the family to Hidden Hills, California, which was about 14 miles from LA. After their move, they would welcome their last child together, Kylie Jenner. The next few years for the brood were peaceful. Kris wrote, quote, "Courtney was off to college at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. Kim had a tight circle of friends, and Chloe was a godsend. Chloe had decided to get her education via homeschooling, and she was an incredible student, which enabled her to become a built-in babysitter and my right arm. Without Chloe, I don't know how I would have gone on with my life. After all, I was 40 by then, and I was starting over with a new husband, 2 new babies, a new house, and a new business. Because of Chloe, I was able to attend business meetings, work out, get my hair cut, even have lunch with a friend. Because of Chloe, I was able to get back to being myself again, and I will never forget the sense of freedom this gave me." Life as Kris knew it was perfect, but she would be shocked when she learned, after doing a Google search on Kim, that Kim had taken off and gotten married to a much older man when she was 19 years old.
So here you are, you've got all these production credits under your belt. You formed the Underdogs.
Yeah.
And then in 1999, was that when you met Kim Kardashian?
98.
98.
Yeah, so when I wrote those songs, those were around the same time that I met Kim. And how I met Kim, let me give you that story. Kevon Edmonds. So I met Kim before then. I met Kim when I worked on 3T, but I didn't know who she was. She was just at the studio. That's Michael's nephews. And Terrell was my really good friend. And I met her then. And then I was at Neverland and I saw her again at Michael's house. And so she remembered me from that. I was just with them. I was hanging and she remembered me from that. She actually worked at a store called Body, and Kevon Edmonds. I would go to that store as well, but I didn't see her there. Kevon saw her there. She contacted him and said, "Hey, she asked him who he was working with, and he said me, and she said, well, can you put me in contact with him?" And that's how that began. So it wasn't what people may say or think. It was her doing.
Okay, so you guys met. And I guess she was 18 at the time when you guys first met?
Yeah.
And then a year later, you guys got married?
Yes.
Okay. She was 19 at the time. You were 29 at the time. And you guys eloped in Las Vegas?
Yep.
Okay. Why elope as opposed to an actual wedding?
She wasn't talking to her parents at the time, or her mom at the time, I think. So, I mean, it was just young love,
But Kris would receive more devastating news. Like her biological father, Bob, her stepfather, Harry Shannon, would die from injuries he sustained in a car accident. Harry Shannon played a huge role in Kris's life, and she was heartbroken with his death in 2003. Shortly after, Kris would receive news from another loved one that their time together might be cut short. She wrote, quote, "Robert was at our son's basketball game at Buckley School. In the middle of the game, he asked me if we could talk. Once we were outside, Robert started to cry. I don't know how to tell you this," he said, "but I have cancer." 8 weeks after his diagnosis, Robert was gone. He died on September 30th, 2003. His death was very painful.
My kids were so devastated by the fact that he was that sick. I mean, we never really believed that he would die, but I always knew, because he was such a good person, and because he was such an amazing Christian, and because he was such an incredible friend and human being, that God probably needed him more than I did, or more than we did. And I always knew somehow, instinctively, even when I was very young and married to him, that God would at some point,
need him back.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I really always thought that. Courtney was very sad, but she had anger. Chloe was really upset and really couldn't see her dad in the last couple of days because she was devastated. So with her, she got so devastated when he died that she lost all of her hair. It literally all fell out. We were like, what is going on? It was devastating. And Kim was the strong one, but grieved inside privately. And Kim was actually able to get up and give the eulogy at his funeral. So that, I was numb. And I was numb. I go into a mode where, I cook things or I clean my drawers. I need that kind of therapy. So I think for each and every one of us, there was an underlying theme of God got us through because we, prayer, and we were together, and we knew that it was in God's plan somehow. We didn't like the plan at the moment, but, there's a bigger picture out there somewhere.
It would take some time for Kris to get her life regulated again, but once she did, it was back to business as usual. She was inspired to open a clothing store along with Courtney. Their first store was Smooch, and then they would later open Dash. She wrote, quote, "We opened Smooch to great success in 2004. The store did well. For me, it was an enormous validation. Never give up on our dreams just because life gets in the way. I was almost 50 when I opened Smooch, and here I was finally achieving something." It should be noted that around this time, Kim divorced her husband, Damon Thomas. She was working as a celebrity stylist in addition to selling clothes on eBay. One of her celebrity clients was R&B singer Brandy. Kim was dating Brandy's brother, R&B singer Ray J. According to legal documents, Brandy and Ray J's mother, Sonia Norwood, gave Kim her credit card to purchase one single item. According to Norwood, Kim used the credit card and purchased things for their stores, Smooch and Dash, in the amount of $120,000. This became a huge problem between Kim and Ray J, with Ray J saying, quote, "She stole money from my family. I couldn't mess around with her anymore because of that." Norwood would eventually file a lawsuit against the Kardashians for these claims. But that's in our second video. Though Kris found success with these stores, she had something else on her mind, reality TV. She wrote, quote, "I always thought our family was certainly entertaining enough, or maybe just crazy enough, to make a good reality show. So when someone told us we should film a pilot, we found the idea very interesting. For the last several years, Kris tried endlessly to get her girls onto reality TV shows by talking to different networks and pitching her ideas. Unfortunately, nothing stuck. Soon enough, though, the right offer would come in. During this time, Kim was now divorced and spent a lot of time with socialite Paris Hilton. Paris created an intimate tape with a former boyfriend that was released and really thrust her into the spotlight. Inspired by the fame her friend received, Kim made a tape with then-boyfriend R&B singer Ray J. Kim and Kris met with publishing companies to release the tape, even though they denied it and said that the tape was leaked. According to Ray J, releasing the tape was a business move made by Kim and Kris.
Okay, well, in 2007, the world was introduced to Kim Kardashian on a large-scale basis when the tape of her and Ray J came out. And for the first time ever, it really propelled the career of somebody to essentially the highest level. Was that a surprise to you at all in terms of the level that she's reached?
I think it was, because it wasn't your traditional route to become a superstar, but
right.
Hey, they made it. You can't, Kris is a genius. That's all I can say. I think that however, if you could take something that might not be to them at the time positive and turn it into $1 billion, that's, kudos to them, is all I can say,
Upon the release of Kim's tape and their upcoming show, Kris created the perfect recipe for attention, fame, and money. And as far as we know, the rest is history.